Morning, everyone. We're studying the second parak, the second chapter of Mishna Meiser Sheni. It's parak based Mishna Aleph, chapter 2, Mishna 1. Meiser Sheni niten lachil l'shtiel l'sicha. Meiser Sheni is used for eating, drinking, and for rubbing on one's body, which is something we mentioned yesterday. Which means that when we're talking about the produce itself that's being consumed in Yerushalayim, or the money being spent on food in Yerushalayim, that money is spent on food, or the Meiser Sheni itself is used only for, it's used for these purposes: eating, drinking, and rubbing into one's body. We know eating because the Torah states explicitly that's what you do with the Meiser Sheni. Drinking is included in eating, and we have a verse in which we derive that anointing, rubbing something into your body, is like drinking. And therefore, all three are valid uses of Meiser Sheni. Lechol davar shedarkei lechol, to eat something that is normal to eat or normally eaten. What that means is that there is a halacha that we're not supposed to allow Meiser Sheni to go to waste. Let's say it does. Let's say you bought something at Meiser Sheni, or you had your Meiser Sheni, it's spoiled. Something spoiled, you don't typically eat. So although we don't want it to go to waste, once the Meiser Sheni comes to the point, or the food that you bought Meiser Sheni money, once it comes to the point that it can't be eaten anymore because it's spoiled or rotten, whatever it is, it's soured, then you don't eat it anymore. It also includes, as part of the Mishna that says to eat what is eaten, also includes to eat something in the manner that's normally eaten. If something is eaten cooked, you don't eat it raw. If something is eaten raw, you don't eat it cooked. That's not the way it's eaten, and therefore, that's not the way to consume the Meiser Sheni. Lasach davar shedarkei lasach, or to rub something that is normally used for rubbing, not something that's not. So, for instance, says the Mishnah, don't rub yourself with wine or with vinegar, because that's not typically what's done with these liquids. Yeah, you drink it. But you rub yourself with oil, because oil is what is used for rubbing. And so too, you don't drink what is typically used for rubbing, like oil, because that's not the way it's used. Okay, so that's the first part of the Mishnah. Now the Mishnah continues. We do not perfume Meiser Sheni oil. That means that they used to add spices to it to add a aroma to it. Now, the Mishnah says you don't do that. You may not add those spices to perfume the oil of Meiser Sheni. Why is that? Because these spices absorb some of the oil. And since we're talking about oil, which you rub into your body, eventually those spices would be thrown away because you can't rub them on you, which means that the oil of Meiser Sheni that's absorbed into the spices is going to waste. Therefore, you may not do that. You may not add the spice to Meiser Sheni oil. Normally, we buy with the Meiser Sheni money this perfumed oil, even though that's how you bought it, meaning it wasn't Meiser Sheni made that was perfumed. It was regular oil perfume. Now I want to use Meiser Sheni money to buy it. You can't. The reason is because Meiser Sheni money has to be used for something that most people, that the average person would use. This kind of perfumed oil is something that spiced oil, perfumed oil, it's the same thing. It's something that only people of very refined tastes used to use. And since the average person doesn't use it, then the way it's explained here in the notes is that something that would only be used by people with refined tastes is more expensive. That's a waste of Meiser Sheni money. To go ahead and spend Meiser Sheni money on something that's so expensive and not really used by most people, that's a waste of the money. Something that's not used by most people has extra expense, and that's wasting the money. Why using the money on such a kind of thing? And therefore, the Meiser Sheni money is used for something that an average person uses. An average person does not use this perfumed oil. But you would be allowed to add spices to the wine, which I think is to perfume it. Also, I'm not sure if it's to add some kind of a spice to it, maybe a spicy flavor to it, or to perfume it. But the point is, when it comes to wine, you can add these spices. And the reason is because, being that we're talking about drinking the wine, so those spices will be drunk together with the wine. So even the wine that was absorbed into the spices will be drunk, therefore won't go to waste. At the same time, the commentaries add that although you could add the spices to the wine, you can't buy the spiced wine because, again, the average person doesn't partake of that. Okay, next halacha. Nafal l'seichai dvash utvalim v'shpichu. You had wine, and honey or spices fell into the wine and brought up its value. Now, commentaries point out it doesn't have to be talking about that it fell in, even if you added it, which we know you can do when it comes to wine. The point is, though, is that it went up in price. So what that means is like this. You've got the original wine. Let's say the original wine is worth 2 slime. You added honey. The honey is worth 1 selah. Now, when you go ahead and you redeem it, when you now transfer, you don't have to take money and transfer the kedusha from this Meiser Sheni wine and transfer it onto money. So you only have to transfer the only part of this thing that has the sanctity of Meiser Sheni is the wine. The added honey doesn't get the Meiser Sheni sanctity, and therefore its value, its value hasn't become sanctified. You need to transfer it onto the money. It's only the wine that has the sanctity, and its value has to be transferred onto the money. The thing is, though, is that when you take, let's say, 2 slayim of wine and 1 selah of honey, it doesn't all of a sudden doesn't only become 3 selahs worth. It becomes 4. The value goes up. It goes up more than the value of the combined value of the actual ingredients. So now we got to figure out, okay, how much of that added value is now, so to speak, attributable to the wine, which had sanctity of Meiser Sheni, and therefore it'll also be sanctified, and how much is attributable to the honey that's not sanctified. And that's what the Mishna says, Hashevach lefi cheshbon. The value, the added value now is calculated according to the proportion. Meaning, the added value now to this entire mixture of the wine and the honey is 4. So again, the wine originally is 2 selah, the honey is 1 selah, and now the added value is another selah because it's worth 4 on the market. So now, how much of that added value is attributable to the wine? The answer is, if the wine is 2/3 of the original combination, then we say that 2/3 of the improvement in the value came from the wine. 1/3 came from the honey. So therefore, at the end, how much money do you need to? How much of the right? How much of the are you going to have to need? How much money are you going to have to need to redeem this Meiser Sheni? The answer is 2 2/3 selah. That's what comes out. That's the amount of money you're going to need to transfer the value from what here has the sanctity of Meiser Sheni onto the money. Got to redeem it. You have to transfer it for its value. Here, the value that comes from the Meiser Sheni in total, which is the wine, is 2 2/3 selah. Okay, the same thing. Dag Mishna is pashlo imakaplutais. Another example, fish that was cooked together with leek. Meiser Sheni. Okay, the leek is Meiser Sheni, not the fish. Okay, v'yishbihu, and now it went up in price. Hashabach lefi cheshbon. Again, you have to calculate the improvement based on the proportion of how much Meiser Sheni is in there. Okay, so don't forget, in this mixture of the fish, you've got the leek that was that was part of the addition of the value. That's Meiser Sheni. And then, meaning it was part of the original, you have to calculate the value of the leek itself. That's part of the calculation of its value, plus now the improvement that comes from the combination. So you've got to deal with the value of the leek. You got to deal with the value of how much it contributed to the added value to this mixture. Okay, now here's an example that doesn't follow that halacha. You got this dough of Meiser Sheni, right? It's a dough. Its ingredients are wheat, water, which is not Meiser Sheni, but the ingredients are wheat. It has value, right? And now you baked it. Now, when you bake, So the dough had the sanctity of Meiser Sheni. It had X amount of value. Now, when you go ahead and you bake it, value goes up. Okay. Now, what contributed to this bread? Well, the dough that was Meiser Sheni, and the wood that the fire was burning from that gave heat to allow this to bake. And that wood is not sanctified. So do we calculate what the wood does into this dough to know, to figure out how much how much the shvach it was contributed by the dough and how much was contributed by the wood? And therefore do it, and therefore you got to figure out the proportion? The answer is no. In this case, hashevach l'sheni. The entire added value belongs to Meiser Sheni. If the dough was worth 3, okay, and now it's worth 4 or 5, the entire amount is all Meiser Sheni. The entire amount is considered sanctified value of Meiser Sheni. That's its value. Its value is now 5. That means now its value, its Meiser Sheni value is 5 or 4, whatever it went up to. You don't go calculating the wood's contribution. Why is that? So the Mishna concludes, this is the rule. Anytime the ingredient that added the value is recognizable here in this product, this final product, then the added value must be calculated according to the proportion of how much Meiser Sheni is in there, how much non-Meiser Sheni is in there. But anytime the ingredient or the part that adds the improvement is not recognizable, then all the value is attributed to Meiser Sheni. So that means like this. In the example where you had wine and you added honey to it, so now the honey is, that addition of the honey is what brings up the value. That ingredient that brought up the value, is it measurable? It certainly is. It added volume. And maybe in another case, you can have a different mixture that adds weight. If the ingredient that brings up the value is measurable in this product, then it gets calculated into the added value. But the wood itself is not mixed into the dough, right? The wood itself doesn't add anything to the measure of the dough. And so to speak, the flavor that comes because of it, because it was baked and now there's an added flavor, well, let's say some other kind of case where flavor is added, but again, you can't measure flavor. So although you detect it, it's there, that doesn't get calculated. That added, that so to speak, added part or ingredient that doesn't sanctify Meiser Sheni, in this case it's the firewood, doesn't get calculated. It doesn't get calculated into the value. And in that case, the value is entirely then Meiser Sheni. So therefore, in the case of the dough that was baked into bread, the entire added value has to be part of your money. You have to have the money of that value in order to transfer all the sanctity of this Meiser Sheni dough onto the money. Okay, we are now up to the Chavetz Chaim, Klal Beis Halacha Yud, chapter 2, paragraph 10. Now, this is going to be a condition. We've been discussing apiklasa. Reuven spoke Lashon Hara about Shimon in front of 3 people, and we say that one of the 3 people who heard this Lashon Hara spoken by Reuven about Shimon, it would not be considered Lashon Hara just to say over what he heard, because in this kind of situation, it's going to get out there, it's going to become known, something that's known isn't going to fall into the prohibition of Lashon Hara. But listen to this condition. The entire permission or license, whatever you want to call it, of apiklasa is only from the point of the person who's saying it. But if you know that the person you're saying it over to now is someone that once he hears this, he will accept it as the absolute truth, and then he may decide to actually add a few more words of degradation on his part about Shimon. To such a person, you may not give even a hint of degradation about your friend in any manner. Even now, when it's ape klasa, when it's in front of three. And if you say the Lashon Hara to him, and now he accepts it, or he adds to it, you have caused him to stumble. You transgress the prohibition of don't put a stumbling block in front of someone blind, which we already said previously is referring to causing someone to sin. Okay. Now, so think about this. That means that if I'm going to use this permission of ape klasa, of de facto sin in front of three, to say it over to someone, it's got to be someone that I know is not going to accept it as a fact. Or I got to be someone that I know is not going to contribute to the Lashon Hara on his own. So you can only say it to a person who you know won't accept it as the truth. It sounds quite limited, right? Let's move on. And whatever we have now said that you cannot do, even though it was said in front of three, even if the person saying it over doesn't say who originally said it. He just says, I heard this and this about someone. Nonetheless, it's forbidden. If you can't say it, doesn't matter whether you reveal the original source of the Lashon Hara. Says the Chavetz Chaim, after everything we've just explained now about this law of ape klasa, of the Lashon Hara spoken in front of three, Re'ei achai, see my brothers, kama yesh l'srachik mikula zu, how much a person should distance himself from this leniency. Shekamat ein lamakam emetzias. You think about it, for everything to come together in a practical sense, that you could actually do this, highly improbable. Uberfrat sha'af imitztaf b'kol hapratim. Now we add something new, and even if, let's say, all the conditions could come together, gam kein tzarech malach kitei yazu. It's not so clear that this opinion is what we follow in practical Jewish law. That's what we said to begin with. The Chavetz Chaim said, some say, right? And I keep trying to remember the whole time to say some say, to remind this is a opinion, because this is the point that he's getting at. At the end of the day, it's not clear if we follow this opinion. According to other halachic authorities, or the Rishonim, or the early halachic authorities, it's not even clear that this leniency even exists. There's different ways of interpreting the Talmud that is the basis for this, according to that opinion, to this leniency of de facto sin in front of three. Therefore, someone who wants to protect his neshama, protect his soul from sin, protect his soul, should distance himself from this license. So here we spent a number of days on this concept, on this leniency of being able to repeat the Lashon Hara, the sin in front of three, and at the end of the day, practically speaking, it's very hard on a practical level to say all the conditions that would allow me to do it have come together. That's number one. And number two, it's not even clear that that is the opinion that we rely on when it comes to our practice of halakha of Jewish law. Have a wonderful day and a wonderful Shabbos.